100%. So I'll give you one, Justin. Here's one that I think, well, I'm going to say, certainly talking to Dan Pfaff, he agreed with me. So when we have a hamstring injury now, if I deal with a hamstring locally, the first thing we do, as soon as that person can stand up, is glute med, lateral pelvis control, standing up. Because what we see is that loss of hip lock, right?
So other people call it pelvic listing for anybody listening, right? Same thing, right?
Yeah. Yep. Trendelenburg, pelvic listing, all of that stuff, hip lock. We do that straight away because you've got that, particularly bicep femoral on that lateral side, we get this inhibition, loss of function in glute medius. You get that from day one, you get on top of that, and you can get that kid back faster and more resiliently. We see it in, again, this is less so I see in America, but you have an ACL reconstruction. In Australia, they still take a bit of semitendinosus tendon.
Okay.
Right? And so then now you've got a knee injury and a hamstring injury.
Yep.
Okay? Now we see that all the time, this big pelvic list. And that was one of my biggest learning situations for me a couple of years ago. It was about my 28th ACL reconstruction. And I thought, we got all this hip lock, but here's the data showing me that we don't. So we've got to improve, we've got to do more. I've got to be better at what I do, which is the point, right? You've got to, no matter how long you've been around, we've got to keep getting better. And that's what I built this to do, to make me better.
You talked about Dan Pfaff, and the thing that I just wrote down there to ask you was, how much have you then seen where Dan will talk about contralateral shoulders affecting the hip? Have you seen things of that nature, like, and dive down that?
Yeah, so I think there's a limit to how far we can go. Like what we can do, because we're at the pelvis, we can see what's happening at the pelvis, but there's no doubt that if you're, particularly when we start talking about rotation of the pelvis, so if you're standing up straight and you just push your right hip forward, so as your pelvis rotates, that's that pepper grinder effect. So your shoulders are going to do the opposite. Now there's a metric that we use, which we just call economy. It's the classic physiological measure of just how economically are you moving. So that's a three-dimensional movement, total movement of the pelvis, right? So what happens is, yes, as we go faster, there's a certain amount of movement. But if you're getting more movement in your pelvis in total than everybody else, that's a problem. And what we see with that is we see guys with bilateral adductor problems there, because when the pelvis is starting to move around, your adductor longus and adductor magnus are trying to tighten to stabilize the femur against the pelvis. And then they can't do what they're meant to do, which is change direction and do all the rest of it. So they get cooked, they get overloaded, they strain. So there's no question. There's a level, like someone like Dan Pfaff and other guys I know, like Adam Larkham in Australia, great track coaches. Man, they go to a depth that is so much further down. Like their knowledge of anatomy is unbelievable. Their knowledge of biomechanics is even further. So I think at the moment what we're trying to focus on is trying to understand how much of that pelvic movement can we quantify, can we help coaches with, and does it contribute? That's the big one. Does it contribute to something that we can make an intervention on? Right now, one of the things we're looking at. Go, man. You have a question?
No, you're good.
We've just did a paper last year, so I've got the actual formal paper is currently in ethics committee at the moment. But we looked at, as the athlete lands, what does their torso do? How far does it pitch forward? Then as they take off, how much does it pitch? Now, what we're able to see, we did a group of American college football players versus Major League Soccer. The American college football players were clearly much stiffer and much more vertical, which you'd expect because they're more like sprinters. If you look at Brian Mann's work, if you look at his textbook, he details all of that because he did so much magnificent work, baseline data on total running. But what we're also able to identify is that guys who had major lower limb injuries, they also had more pitch on that injured limb. So my question to myself now is, when we look at pelvic stability and what that means, are we addressing enough in in the sagittal plane with the point of as we land on the ground, as we take off? I think there's more to be done there. Particularly, I don't know if you've come across a guy out of Finland, Johan Lahti. So Johan's done a lot of work with Jurdan Mendiguchia and JB Morin and that group on hamstrings and speed. A lot of magnificent work up there. But he's also speculated in his papers. He's saying all of this different pelvic movement, frontal plane, sagittal, we need to understand that, because if you increase the angle of your torso in the sagittal plane, so forward to backward, yeah.
Thanks for watching that video. If you enjoyed it, click right here for videos just like that, and make sure you click here to subscribe to our channel. Have a great rest of your day.